Good afternoon. Today is Tuesday, May 20th, 2025, and we are going to begin our 4:30 City Council work session. Mr. Clerk, if you could go ahead and call roll call attendance, please.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Councilwoman Little Roberts.
Here.
Councilman Taylor.
Here.
Councilman Overton.
Here.
Councilman Whitlock.
Here.
Councilwoman Strader.
Here. Great, thank you. Next up, we have adoption of the agenda.
Council Vice President, move that
Councilman Overton.
we adopt the agenda with no changes.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda with no changes. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted. Next up, we have approval of the consent agenda.
Council Vice President,
Councilman Overton.
move that we approve the council agenda for the Council Vice President or Council President, if he shows up, to sign and the clerk to attest.
Second. Okay, we have a motion, a second. Just to clarify with the motion maker, if that was a motion to approve the consent agenda.
That is correct. Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Fantastic. Okay, we have a motion, a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Okay, with that, everyone go ahead and signify your approval by saying aye. Aye. Okay, opposed? The ayes have it, and the consent agenda is approved. Next up, we have item 9, the Public Works Proclamation. If you'll please join me at the podium. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'd like to go ahead and read this proclamation for Public Works Week. Whereas the City of Meridian residents have peace of mind with every faucet turned on, shower taken, toilet flushed, thanks to the professional employees of the Meridian Public Works team. And whereas each often unseen essential worker, engineer, inspector, operator, technician is committed to protecting our health, safety, environment, and quality of life through the 24/7 supply and distribution of clean and safe water, efficient collection and treatment of wastewater, and the management of solid waste. And whereas the Meridian Public Works Department educates the community about the work they do through informative and engaging public outreach. And whereas people, purpose, presence is the theme for the 2025 National Public Works Week, and it represents the often unseen, steadfast, and heroic efforts put forth by the public works professionals. Therefore, I, Elizabeth Strader, on behalf of Robert E. Simison, proclaim the week of May 18th to May 24th, 2025 as Meridian Public Works Week in the City of Meridian, and call upon all citizens and civic organizations to acquaint themselves with and to recognize the substantial contributions which public works employees make every day to our health, safety, comfort, and quality of life. Thank you. Okay. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Director McVeigh to share any remarks that she'd like to provide.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, we appreciate the council and mayor's support of Public Works this week and all the weeks of the year. What we do is definitely not easy or cheap, and we appreciate your guys' continued support for the technical, the projects, the staff, all of the things that make it happen. Really want to just appreciate and acknowledge all of the Public Works staff that also make things happen, and invite everybody to our Public Works Week Expo, which is on Thursday from 4 to 7 out front of City Hall. Is a really fun, family-friendly event where you can come see all of the big Public Works equipment and informational and educational demonstrations from our staff.
Thank you so much. And certainly speaking on behalf of the whole council, when I say that the public works infrastructure is critical infrastructure and that we very much appreciate your team and all that they do for us. If you don't mind, we could take a quick picture here.
Madam Vice President,
Yes,
may I make a comment?
absolutely.
I had the opportunity last night with Lorelei and her team to do the Go with the Flow tour. And it was a sellout again. It's in high demand and our residents in our community are just interested in the great work that our city employees do, and it's pretty amazing. So I actually had one of the attendees, a constituent, send me an email this afternoon and just like to share what he said. He said, I thought last night's event was first class, fun, and informative. As mentioned, I've always been impressed and happy with all aspects of our city management and departments. So I just wanted to pass that along and say, well done. It was a great tour, despite the rain, but it was a great tour. And I think people left better informed about the great work that our city employees do every day on their behalf. So I just wanted to say thanks.
Councilman Whitlock, thank you so much for providing those comments. Are there any other comments from the council? Okay. All right, since there are no other comments, let's go ahead and move on to our fiscal year 2025 budget amendment in the amount of $37,000 for streetlight maintenance and repair. I'd like to recognize again Director McVeigh. Go ahead.
Thank you, Council. So this evening I have a budget amendment in the amount of $37,000 for our streetlight maintenance and repair line item. So this is not the line item that we use for special projects or LED upgrades. It's specifically for routine streetlight outages, issues, damages, those kind of things that we find throughout the year. So we currently have about $12,000 left in this line item, and at our average expenditure rate, we should be running out of that somewhere at the end of this month. So we have really two options: bring forward a budget amendment so we can continue to fix and repair streetlights that go out through the remaining part of this fiscal year, or we can also stop and hold those outages and wait until we get a new budget in October. We don't recommend that just because some of these it's important to address in a timely manner. So we're coming forward to you to essentially ask for additional maintenance money to be able to finish out, or maintenance and repair money to be able to finish out the remainder of this fiscal year.
Okay. Thank you, Lorelei. Are there any questions? Okay. I guess I just have a simple question, which is a clarification about whether this comes out of the general fund or whether this comes out of Public Works in the enterprise fund, or if it is a combination of both.
Great question. Councilwoman Strader, it comes out of the general fund. So this would come out of fund balance on the general fund.
Okay. Thank you. I think this is pretty straightforward. All right.
Madam
Council Vice President.
Councilman Taylor.
Yeah, I just make a note. I think as we've discussed this over the last couple of years, I always try to maintain a very right on the nose budget line here with respect to not having more than is necessary. As you recall, this was a pretty robust discussion from a couple of years ago. We've always viewed adequate streetlights as much a public safety component as anything. So I think this makes some sense. I don't think we want to see a gap in sort of fixing that which is broken. This isn't for the upgrades and for the new stuff. This is to kind of fix the things that are broken. So I think it makes some sense. And when we're ready, I'll make a motion to approve that.
Okay. Fantastic. Councilman Overton, did you have a question or a comment?
Just a quick comment, but some of it's already been said, but repairing our streetlights, I mean, not only is it public safety, it's traffic safety, it's part of our entire community's well-being. To me, it's part of our critical infrastructure. We can't afford to fall behind on that. It's all about quality of life here, and we take that very seriously and absolutely be supporting this.
Okay. All right, fantastic. I think at this point, a motion would be in order. Councilman Taylor?
I move that we approve a fiscal year 2025 budget amendment in the amount of $37,000 for streetlight maintenance and repair.
Second.
Okay, great. We have a motion and a second to approve the fiscal year 2025 budget amendment. Mr. Clerk, would you go ahead and call roll, please?
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Councilman Cavanagh.
Aye.
Councilwoman Little Roberts.
Aye.
Councilman Taylor.
Aye.
Councilman Overton.
Aye.
Councilman Whitlock.
Aye.
Councilwoman Strader.
Aye. Okay, with that, everyone is in favor and the fiscal year 2025 budget amendment in the amount of $37,000 is approved.
Sure, that's fine. Just real quick, Madam Vice President. Real
Absolutely.
quick, I just want to recognize I walked in right before the vote. I just, for the record, wanted everyone to be clear. I was listening on YouTube as I was driving in, was following the conversation. Councilmember Whitlock, loved hearing the comments from your constituents about Public Works Week. I share that. So apologies for being late to our Public Works team and much appreciation to our great Council Vice President who did a great job of picking things up on a very last minute basis. So thank you very much.
Council President Cavanagh, it is excellent to have you. And with that, let's go ahead and move into item 11, the Employee Health Benefits Plan Trust Update. And we will recognize the City Attorney, Bill Neri, to provide some remarks.
Thank you, members of council. I'm here to talk about the Health Trust. When we did our presentation last few weeks ago, a question was brought up about remarketing the plan or how that would be done. And so I wanted to put together a presentation to kind of explain how this type of plan, because it's partially self-funded by the city and managed by a health trust, that it's different than maybe a traditional health plan you may have seen in other circumstances, or like Councilmember Overton, who's been here a while with the city. We previously had a fully funded plan that is done differently and marketed differently. So this is different. So I wanted to make sure you understood that. And if that's the direction the council wants us to go, we certainly can. Okay, so basically the difference between the two, as I was saying, is we're talking about a self-funded trust, which is what we are. So with marketing, then we're looking at really the service side. So now we're not looking at just the basic costs of the healthcare services, but actually the services that are being provided by the vendors here. So there's administrative fees and service fees. There's a stop loss. There's a premium as to how much that is, what that is, and what they're going to pay for above that, as well as on a self-funded plan. There is, the risk and the estimates and the total claims experience for the year is also, again, managed by the trust. So it's slightly different than the model of a fully insured plan below, where the insurance company evaluates the risk. They determine the set premium and they charge just like your homeowner's insurance, just like your own if you have another type of insurance or something else out there in the marketplace, you've either used the exchange system that the state provides or something else to provide health care for a different member of your family in some other function, some other way. There are other ways those are done, but that's what a fully insured plan does. Employers, again, don't control the amount of the premium, and the premiums can vary greatly from one carrier to the next. So that one is more than what traditional, I think the average person might think of when we're remarketing, that you're going to be looking at a cost issue. When you have a self-funded plan like we have, you're looking predominantly more on the service side. So just a slightly different model from what you may have been used to. So again, a market pulse check is appropriate. And one of the questions I've had, both from council members or employees or the mayor, and in fact, Council President Cavanagh and I spoke about, is I think it's important both for us as the trust, as well as you as the elected officials, be able to show the public that we are getting the best value. You're obviously looking for the best value for the services and the costs that the taxpayers are helping pay for. And we want to make sure we're getting the best value for the employees as well. So a pulse check is a very common practice for these types of self-funded plans. And if we did that, we would put an RFP out and we'd be looking at the market. Now, again, unlike a lot of larger states or different states where there's a number of carriers or options that exist in the market, Idaho's a little more limited. There are two predominant carriers in the market, that's Blue Cross and Regions, which is also Blue Shield. And then there are smaller ones, Pacific Source and Select Health. So there's smaller types of vendors out there They aren't quite as expansive or as extensive as Blue Shield and Blue Cross are in our market, but they are out there. So we would do, if we were going to do this, we would do a pulse check with all of those vendors as to what services they could provide to the trust. Blue Cross and Regions have fairly similar networks. And again, most of you or most of our employees understand that a lot of healthcare these days are driven by networks. They're driven by what's within or with outside of network, and that usually drives what the cost of the services is going to be provided. Blue Cross and Regions have the largest. Again, most people, as you know, in this area predominantly are driven to two primary vendors for medical services. That's St. Luke's and St. Al's. That's where the majority of the services are held for majority of services in their community and throughout the state of Idaho. So that's where most of the services are going to be, and Blue Cross and Blue Shield are the ones that have a majority of those vendors. Pacific Source has a full PPO network that's slightly more expensive. It's a little bit different, again, because it's smaller, or the narrower options by St. Luke's or St. Al's that are also used through Select Health, which is a St. Luke's plan. Again, it's a little bit smaller, so as you would imagine, with less coverage and less vendors available to them, the cost is going to be slightly higher, but that's just the nature of the way the marketplace is. So typically, again, cost savings you're looking for, it's a factor, unlike with maybe a typical, like I said, what a general person might think of in the public of an RFP, where you would be putting out a bid for a price for a particular product. That's a factor of consideration in this type of plan, but it's not the sole driver. It's certainly a part of it, but you have to look at what the cost is, because again, without at least some significant cost savings, and 5% is really just a market driven number. And it's, again, it's a factor. It's not the only factor, but you have to look at all the disruption or changes that can have with folks. Some people are based on the plan information that's provided, the doctors that are within network of one and maybe not the other. Most are in the same, not all of them are in the same. What's covered and what's not covered. Again, between the two different services, between Blue Shield or Blue Shield Regions and Blue Cross, there can be slight differences. What documentations are needed, what the cards the employees have. I'll tell you, as a member of the trust and a member of our benefits committee, we have lengthy conversations on the impact of employees when the card's going to change. Whether the card is the one that is given by the health carrier, the one that you get annually or can get annually for your health one, or the one that's for your flex spending, if you choose to use the flex spending. We have a lengthy discussion because it impacts folks. It's difficult for people to deal with changes, even the slightest changes, and they get confused if the numbers are different, if things change slightly. And we want to make sure there's a seamless transition for folks if that happens. So the card's changing, the number's changing, the billing services can sometimes be different between different carriers or different users and different service providers. So sometimes you'll have to re-enter all your information. Now, sometimes you may only have to do it once, so it may not be that inconvenient, but it is something, again, to have to inform employees, and also trying not to overwhelm our human resources staff on the same side, because people now get confused and they have to call and say, I don't understand. I went to my doctor. They wouldn't take my card. Oh, I needed to change it. I didn't know that. I got a different card. Oh, I didn't see it. Again, lots of issues. Just again, we want our primary goal always with the trust and with the HR help is to keep employees informed. That's really the goal. Make sure they're informed, but they know what they need to do, what they can do, and hopefully take care of a lot of those types of issues before they get there. Nothing worse than going to the doctor and you're not well, or you're having to deal with a health condition of some sort, and you got to bring the right card on the right day and make sure you have all the paperwork that you need. You want to hopefully get all that done ahead of time. So again, lots of, a bunch of things that we also will factor in if we do this and evaluate between service providers, what impacts that could be. And then what would be the impact of staff to make some changes if that's the decision that we decide to go with. Again, organizations often can remain for many years with one carrier for a lot of reasons. And again, we've benefited a lot from our relationship with Blue Cross. I can't emphasize enough, and I think I mentioned it a number of times in our last presentation, we have developed a good relationship with Blue Cross because of our continued ongoing partnership with them. And we've had situations, and these are just some bullets that we've identified from the trust side of how it has worked in the past. Again, not a reason that we can't evaluate what's in the marketplace. It's just factors that we'll have to look at. We've had expedited implementation of some changes, biosimilars, I mentioned the last time. Originally, when Blue Cross brought this opportunity for some changes to our plan that would help potentially lower some costs for some pharmaceuticals, based on the way their program worked, our best rollout opportunity was October 1. At our last trust meeting last month, we agreed and authorized that to go forward so we could at least get it in the pipeline so we could make an October 1 change. As our representative that we worked with Blue Cross went back and talked further with their staff and their higher ups, they were able to move us up to July 1. So again, that was very helpful. I think that again was part of our partnership. Dispute issues have been handled pretty rapidly. Again, because we have worked closely with them, with our departments like Human Resources and Blue Cross, they expedite our work. You know, again, we're dealing with the same people, the same personnel. They're dealing with the same staff here. That's very helpful. HR has direct access to their dedicated service team. Again, that's really helpful from a customer standpoint. And it also helps resolve a lot of employee issues. You know, oftentimes employees get stuck in this, for lack of a better word, trying situation with any type of insurance or any type of vendor, whether it's with a medical provider, hospital, doctor office, something else, pharmaceutical, pharmacy. And sometimes you have to work through like Blue Cross as the provider. Again, the longer term commitment we've had with them and the working relationship we have has been very positive. And that's been helpful to assist employees through some of these situations that we've had. We get rate renewals as early as we can. We try to get them in May. We have our trust meeting is actually tomorrow. We're hoping to get some feedback as soon as possible. Obviously, if we want to have something by the budget time, if possible, whenever we can, so that we can bring that forward and make sure we're staying in line with the city's budgeting system. They do recognize that. It has taken a while to get there. I mean, it's certainly been an ongoing process, and a lot of that is both the way the carriers operate in the state as well as how the state operates and the way budgeting works. So it is an ongoing thing. Diabetes no copay program. That was a really good example where, again, our working relationship with Blue Cross really helped. We had some changes in the Blue Cross program a couple of years ago, and we had some employees that were impacted by this diabetes program with insulin pumps. The general program for Blue Cross did not cover that when they made some changes, and we had made some changes. And we were unaware from the trust side how money that would impact. And I think this also speaks probably more relevant to the trust value for employees than just Blue Cross's value for the employees. If you're dealing with a fully funded trust where you're not dealing with staff personnel that can address these concerns and actually can advocate for an issue or concern that you might have as an employee, this particular one, and I will not get the exact numbers right, but it affected less than 10 employees. And in a large program where we have 600 employees with multiple dependents, so you have a plan that has a couple thousand people or more in it, many plans are not going to be that concerned, and not from a callous standpoint or an uncaring standpoint, but it's hard to sometimes get down to an impact on 5 to 7, 8 people out of a couple thousand. And oftentimes in a larger program, without the connection that employees and the trust can have with the employees, sometimes those issues get lost. And to be fair, this particular one came to the trust board. They asked about this concern. It was impactful to them. There was some additional costs that were significant, diabetes costs. And one of the things that are really important, and we've always emphasized with the trust, is preventative care for certain types of conditions and illnesses is significantly more important than people realize. And diabetes is one of them. It can lead to serious health conditions, much more expensive health conditions, untreated or allowed, because what happens with many people, unfortunately, costs will drive some of those issues. and people will seek less treatment or less care because of cost. And that's unfortunate. And we as a trust have always pivoted the other way. We want to provide the best that we can for employees, but also to stay in front of these serious health issues. You know, high blood pressure is another one. It's a very easy type of medical condition to control early if you pay attention to it, take care of it, and address it. It is very expensive to wait till it gets out of control. Diabetes is the same. So the trust board felt it was important. We advocated to add this program back into our plan with Blue Cross. We worked with them and they agreed. And we added this back in and it covered those few employees. Again, I think that's probably as much from the trust perspective, but also with Blue Cross. So those are the things we'd be looking at. Again, if that's the council's desire, we can certainly put that out and see what the market would show. And if there are some savings or benefits that could be of value to the city from both a cost and service standpoint, we certainly can evaluate that and take a look at that if that's what your desire is.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Neri. And with that, any questions?
Madam Vice President, Mr. President, not quite sure honestly who, Madam Vice President.
Councilwoman Little Roberts, go ahead.
Madam Vice President Bill, you and I had a chat about the last presentation. And so a couple of questions that kind of came out of that so that the rest of the council is aware. Because I think one of the things that got all of our attention was it last year that the increase was very, very low or non-existent.
Correct.
And then this year, we're looking at a big jump. And when you and I discussed it, I think it came across a little bit different than the presentation we'd had or the discussion we'd had when you were in front of all the council. So I didn't know if you wanted to kind of clarify that a bit would be helpful.
Well, again, part of it is, again, we've been trying to right size it. I think Councilmember Taylor mentioned that on the other one, that we've been trying to right size a lot of our budgeting. So I think if I remember correctly, we had a big surplus a couple of years ago. So we had a fairly big remainder, which we could then afford to absorb some costs and impacts last year. So last year we had a 0% increase. This year the proposed is about 17%. In talking with finance, they anticipate normally about an 8% annual increase on the average anyway. So to them, it was not that impactful. They had kind of planned and forecasted that there would be some cost and anticipated with a 0 in 1 year that we'd likely have more. The concern ends up coming partly because we took that surplus and used that to pay down and absorb some of those costs because we're trying to stay within a fairly tight budget amount for this trust. And so the other side of that means that potentially if we miss that target, which I think I mentioned last time, we did, and we're going to be coming back and bringing forward a budget amendment for some adjustments to our reserve to stay within that tight window. It gives us a little less cushion, but we were trying not to build our direction for the trust was not to build a larger reserve, but to try to keep the trust pretty narrow. And so therefore that's where we had, a good year. We sort of rode that through another year, and now we're kind of back to where we are. And we should be kind of righting the ship and kind of keeping it a fairly steady pace going forward, we hope. So did that answer your question? I'm sorry if I missed that.
Madam Vice President, Bill, yes, that part it did,
Okay.
but we can finish the discussion on this and I have a different question.
Okay, Council
Vice President Strader.
Council President Kavanaugh, go ahead.
Bill, now I'm confused. And so I guess I'm going to try and follow this from a step 1 to step 2. My first question is, last year, was there a proposed increase in our health insurance? Yes or no?
No.
No. So Madam Vice President, a couple follow-ups if I may. So
Go
the
ahead.
trust didn't use reserve dollars to pay down anything because there was no proposed increase.
Council President Kavanaugh, there was no proposed increase, and I am not going to pretend to be the expert on that. But there was no proposed increase. We did have enough funds to cover all the costs that we had, and that's all we had. But we don't have a surplus beyond what I reported to you the last time. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we didn't have an increase. And all of that comes out of just what the cost of the program is. How much do we have to fund any cost of the program?
Okay, so the funds the city provided in the budget covered the cost of operating the program. And you didn't request any additional funds because the funds that you had available met the request of the vendor.
Yes.
No proposed increase, so, okay. And council, maybe that's where I was confused. It made it sound in your explanation that the trust chose to pay down some of that increase to keep something more constrained, but that's not what you're trying to convey to us.
No, and I'm sorry if that made it seem that way. What it is because we didn't have, because we had the additional funding, we didn't need additional funding last year because there was no proposed increase. We could absorb the total cost of the program. But again, with the changes in the healthcare and the cost of rising healthcare, we can't maintain that without some adjustment. And we didn't come for an adjustment last year. We did the year before.
Which is why you're coming then before us for a budget amendment.
Correct.
Thank you. That'll provide me some clarification.
Councilwoman Little Roberts, did you have additional questions?
Yes, thank you. Bill, we also talked about an employee that had needed a battery replacement, and it took weeks. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that it's generally a much shorter time, but did you get any additional information about why that was denied, why it took so long, the whole process? Because it was weeks.
So, no, I didn't, because the employee has to bring that. And I can't reach out to the employee. So if you want to share with the employee to bring that forward, I can't. Now, I'm not saying he hasn't run that and the person hasn't done it. He didn't come to the board. I don't know that he didn't go to HR. But I also don't feel comfortable to go to an employee and say, Councilmember Little Roberts talked to me about this. So I really need them to do that.
Thank you. I think we've had a little bit of miscommunication there because I did share our conversation with him. And so I think he thought someone was going to reach out to him, but I'll tell him that he needs to initiate the conversation.
My misunderstanding too.
Okay.
I apologize.
Thank you.
So Vice President?
Yep, Councilman Taylor.
Bill, thank you. I'm not sure if you can answer this question or if you'll have access to this information. I'm wondering though, with insurance, higher utilization, it's hard to predict that sometimes. Kind of curious if you know if the sort of explosion of the use of GLP drugs has, over the last year to 2 years, whatever that time frame is, has that been part of what we've seen in this big jump over this last year with the proposed rates that we're looking at? I know just in looking at some other things that much higher use and, that kind of trickles down into added expenses, but I'm just curious if there's any correlation between the higher usage and demand there in terms of what it means for our rates.
Members of council, it's a great question. And certainly there is a greater use of that particular types of drugs now than there used to be. I have not seen it on our list of higher costs that are related to the program, so I don't know that. But I'm certainly can bring that to our board meeting tomorrow to at least get some answers for that, because I don't know.
Follow up if I may. I think that would be interesting to know if you have the aggregate data of how much we spent this last year on that versus previous, and the number, how much has been used, because I'm only guessing, but it would seem that there's probably something there that might lead to some of the higher costs. But I'd be interested to know if you have the answers to that.
Yeah, we could certainly find out a little more. I mean, my little bit of knowledge is, again, the people that are being prescribed that type of medication that are related to a health condition, I'm sure has grown up. I know many that use that type of treatment and that are not necessarily health condition related, but maybe may not have same coverage for that drug particularly. So I don't know what they're paying for, but I don't have enough information to tell you beyond that.
Actually, along those lines, maybe just one thing I've been curious about, whether we wanted to look at like a pilot program around a compounded version of that medication for certain employees. It's just an idea, but it seems like along the lines of what you're discussing, where, sometimes prevention can really yield benefits. The sticker shock on those medications is really astounding. So I don't think paying full boat outside of a regular medical condition would work, but just thinking creatively along those lines. And then I had another question, and then I'll go to everybody else to see what they have. When is the last time we put this out to bid, and what is the cadence of reviewing providers that you would recommend?
I don't know. I saw Christina back there. I don't know if Christina knows when's the last time we actually put out this. You're talking about since we adopted the self-funded program? So not since we did that. So that's been 5 years, you know. I don't know if we have any, I don't recall before that.
Ms. Barney, go ahead.
I believe the last time we went out to bid for a medical provider would have been when we went self-funded, but I'll have to double check when that was. And what was your other question?
Yeah, and just like from a human resources standpoint for a self-funded plan, like what is the cadence of RFPing that service? Or how often would you typically expect that we would go and actually have a competitive bidding process on that service?
Yeah, so as Bill stated earlier in the presentation, we typically don't do RFPs for a self-funded plan. It's market pulse checks, and you'd usually do those every 3 to 5 years.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Yep. Council President Kavner.
Mr. Neri, when you were kind of going over that there were only 2 vendors that kind of in the marketplace that would likely meet our needs and would respond, can you help me understand why don't other national health carriers that I see kind of advertised on the news, your Humanas, your HCIs, like why are they not eligible to participate in?
It's not that they're not eligible necessarily, it's that they're not responding to our requests for our market. Like Bill had said earlier, we're looking at network, and specifically for self-funded, we're looking at service more than anything else. Are they able to service in our network in our area? And then are they able to provide the service that we need? And so with a self-funded plan, you're looking for a niche pretty much.
Understood, okay.
And so when you're getting broad networks like that, they're not able to fill that niche.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could probably maybe add on to that, I think, at least from my experience, that as much as we think we're such a large growing market, we are fairly small population wise in reality. And I think with Idaho, when you have such a diversity of land and population that's so spread out between North Idaho and Eastern Idaho and the Treasure Valley, it's very difficult for a vendor to be part of this market. I mean, because it's just the vastness of the state. Again, you have big states like California, but you have a lot of pockets of a lot of population along a fairly, consistent corridor. We don't have that, but that's my only other thought of that.
Vice President.
Councilman Whitlock, go ahead.
Mr. Neri, just a kind of a follow-on to Councilman Taylor's question about what's driving the cost. If I recall from your last presentation, again, you said it tonight as well, the finance anticipates about an 8% increase every year. Last year we had 0. This year we're projecting 17, so it kind of averages out over the 2-year period. But it would be interesting to know why we go from 0 to 17, and is it the GLPs? Is it age banding? It'd be nice to have an understanding of what the factors are. I mean, is our employee base, are we getting older and costing more? If so, we've got to come to a recognition of that those costs will go up. Is it the use of these specialized drugs or other things? So it'd be helpful to know what some of the drivers are.
I don't know if this one's on. I can talk a little bit to that. We do review our large claims every month, and I'll look at the GLPs. I'm not seeing those hit at least the top of the list. What is hitting the top of the list is like Humira. That is a huge one, and that's one of the ones that we're moving to the biosimilars. But our cancers, our heart attacks, our preemie babies, and those are just unfortunately things that we can't predict. But like with the heart attacks, even some of those cancers, some of that preventative care, and what we really are trying to promote is, primary care providers going in and getting your wellness checks, getting yourself, that preventative care so that you can find those things early so that you don't have those higher claim costs. That's really where we see cost savings on our plan. And that's really what we want to try to get to and promote, because that ultimately over time is going to save the plan the most amount of money and really be the most beneficial for our employee health overall.
Yeah, a few years ago, when we looked at those higher cost drugs, Stelara was #1 every month. It was incredibly expensive. But through some of the cost savings and some of the changes in the plan, construction and design, that cost of that particular drug has gone down. So it doesn't hit the top of our list, whereas Humira does. And we did ask that question at our trust meeting last month is, okay, if we add this one to this biosimilar, what else is there? What else can we get there? Well, at the moment, that is the only one. But Blue Cross is evaluating additional ones that we may be able to add in 2026 that might be able to add it onto that program. That's why we started to, let's add it now while we can, and at least add in the one that is expensive and is on our list, or whatever else we can add to that as it grows. But that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Okay, I have one further question. Could you maybe explain, I noticed you're using the terminology of taking a pulse check as opposed to an RFP. Did you want to talk about, or is there a distinction there between kind of like what you view as a pulse check versus an RFP that would go through our procurement division, typically with like large property, plant, and equipment or contracts? If you could just speak to that, what would you envision if the city council was to pursue some sort of market competition for this particular service?
Well,
Yes, so as Bill stated earlier, the trust is actually what's the entity that is contracting with a medical provider. And so we don't do an RFP that goes through the purchasing and all of that. We do a market pulse check. We check and see what the medical carriers are offering as far as those service fees and things like that. Make a decision on the carrier that we want to go to that's going to provide the service and the fees that the trust feels comfortable contracting with. And then we provide those contracts. We would likely bring that forward to make sure that the council is comfortable with that, as you are a large funding body. And then we would move forward with that. But because we don't have to go through the city's purchasing, it's not a formal RFP.
Maybe a follow-up, you don't have to go through it, but could you? I guess is a question I would have, or are there resources that you might consider leveraging by using the procurement's approach to, I mean, because this is what they do all day, right? Is competitive processes, so.
well, and I think the whether we call it a pulse check or an RFQ, I guess it's more of a request for qualifications, right? Because you're looking for service providers and the services they can provide you and what you need. I don't think it's prohibited. I mean, again, to be fair to the trust and to make sure we keep separate as much as we can, we'd always probably have to reach out to the legal counsel for the trust to see if there's any issues from Department of Insurance side or concerns they'd have if we use the city's process and then we didn't do it separately, because DOI is always looking for that somewhat separation. The trust has some level of independence, even though the city is obviously the primary funder of the program. So that would probably be one factor we'd at least have to consider. Otherwise, no, I don't think there's a problem, because otherwise we would simply do like we have done for other vendors where we've used purchasing for service vendors, when we used it for example, engineering firms, where we're looking for the services they can provide. It's not necessarily just a price. So generally, that's a similar idea.
Thank you, that's helpful. So I think we've heard a presentation, and clearly there are some switching costs and other concerns, but I think we've laid out different directions we could go. What is the feeling from council at this point? Are we ready to make a determination about what we want to do here with a potential guidance on getting a pulse check kind of from market providers here for our health trust, or do we want to gather more information for a couple of weeks and have Mr. Neri come back?
Council Vice President Strader.
Mhm.
I guess I have maybe one more question. Will at least help me form that.
Absolutely.
So, Bill, in your presentation, you talked about kind of the ongoing relationship that we have with our current provider and some of the benefits that we've received. As you go out for a pulse check, are you able to reinforce that those things are going to remain important regardless of who our vendor is? I think those things are really important, and those can be captured in an RFP or an RFQ. I guess I'm not familiar with a pulse check process, and so that's probably where some of my hesitation is coming from on that, because I've not been a part of that. I think maintaining some of these things that are really important to our employees, we would want to make sure that we are leading with some of that when we are asking for the vendors in the marketplace to be able to meet our needs.
Councilmember Caver, I don't see that as any problem really, and it's being identified, because what we're going to identify is what matters to us, the city, the trust, in providing a service to our employees. And, you know, we've had, we've experience with one vendor and what they do, but they still need to articulate that. I mean, no different than a secondary vendor that is interested in this program and wanting to provide that service to the city. They just need to articulate, what does that look like? We have to be able to identify that clearly in an RFP or a pulse check so that they can answer to it. And then we have to have a fair evaluation system to evaluate it. I don't see that as an impediment.
Council Vice President Strader, I'll just share kind of my thoughts is we rely on our staff to help us guide with things that we are not subject matter experts on. And I think Keith Watts is a subject matter expert. So I guess my request might be is to ask Mr. Watts to watch today's presentation and bring a recommendation back to us about what the best course forward is, whether that is a informal pulse check, if it is an RFP or an RFQ process, taking lines, you know, this is one of the largest competitive expenses outside of a capital purchase the city will make. I want to make sure that we are being respectful to the anonymity of the trust, but also making sure that we are doing at least what I think are probably the two biggest priorities. One is making sure that we're providing a service that meets the needs of our employees. That's number one with a bullet. And then number two is that we're continuing to be good fiscal stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. And I think Mr. Watts can help us guide what the best course of action is for there. So that would be my recommendation.
Is there any discussion or feedback?
Madam Vice President,
Absolutely. Councilwoman Little Roberts, go ahead.
my comment would be that we need to check legally to make sure that that doesn't mesh the city and the trust too much before we have Mr. Watts go to any work.
Well, if the council is okay with it, Council President Kavner, we have our trust meeting tomorrow. We can certainly bring that to the trust tomorrow so that we can reach out to our council, at least get some indication from Mr. West if any concerns he has from the legal side. And then simultaneously, we can then reach out to Mr. Watts. And then hopefully maybe in your next, we're not meeting next week, but 2 weeks from now, we can have an answer for you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that feels like, I'm seeing a lot of head nods. That feels like good direction that we should go in. And I think hopefully that provides you some good direction. So I have the action items listed as following up with legal concerns, following up with procurement, and then coming back in 2 weeks with an update on kind of your recommendation from the Health Trust, more specifically on whether a pulse check or other approach is recommended.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina.
Okay. With that, we'll move on to item number 12, the discussion of the proposed UDC amendments, and we will recognize Mr. Hood and Mr. Parsons. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vice President Strader, members of council. First, I want to call to your attention the memo that is in today's packet. There's a lot of information and a limited amount of time. So we'll go ahead and pull the hook when the time is appropriate. We'll use as much as you're willing to give us here this afternoon, but we aren't going to be able to get through everything. And we don't even have everything in this memo, but we did highlight those things we've been working on since the last time we were before you to talk about these topics in general, which was September. So some of what we're going to do today, and maybe I'll just pause there real quick. I do believe Emily Kane's online. She's been part of the team. So any questions that maybe are for legal, Emily's been right there. Bill Parsons is actually the lead on this one. I drew the short straw and going to kind of facilitate the discussion and MC. And then we have Lacey from Code Enforcement as well, who's been very critical in bringing that side, that component of a lot of the changes you'll hear about. Not all of them, but a lot of them do have that code enforcement perspective that's very important here. So just quickly, the background process, just mentioned the bare bones of our staff team, but we have members from fire marshals been part of these discussions too, as well as other city staff. The UDC focus group is still in conversations about this. But some of the feedback we got last time we talked to council was you want to get more of a heads up and understand kind of the scope of some of the changes before the public hearing. So that's why we're here, is to give you that heads up that there are some potential changes. There are a couple of these though that we do need some feedback and direction on as well. So trying to get through those at least today, those ones where to us, it's still a question mark. So again, I kind of mentioned it in my first opening remarks, but we're going to highlight some of those things. We aren't going to go through the changes line by line. What I will say is if we get a general green light from you today, we're meeting with the UDC focus group on Thursday again, and we're going to take some of the feedback we get today, tweak as necessary, But we are looking to submit an application to go through the public hearing process here within the next couple of weeks, with a hearing likely end of next month is what we're targeting right now on our calendar at P and Z. So that puts it on your docket probably in August, sometime early August, something like that. So, but again,
maybe
we're here
just-
to, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just for a second. So just in terms of process, I think in this evening, just kind of looking around the room, I feel like tonight, just based on the agenda, we could go close to 6 o'clock on this item if people are comfortable, unless there is a constraint or an issue that anyone has, in which case, let me know, please. But feels like that's what we could do. So I would say, Caleb, we'll plan to go until 5:55, and then that would give people time for a bio break or a phone call. All right, please proceed.
Thank you. So again, a little bit of,
Sorry, real quick. Is there any chance, I can't get to my email for some reason, we could get the memo you sent us up so that we can see it as well?
I'll ask Bill or Chris, please, to go ahead and pull
Thank you.
that up if we can. I'm gonna go ahead and start, and then hopefully they can catch up with that. Looks like Mr. Parsons is on it. So again, just maybe a little bit of process background. We work with that UDC focus group, and I'll just say, I think those meetings have been very well attended. Our attendance has fluctuated kind of historically. The last several meetings, and for this round, we've had, again, probably historic highs as far as participation from a wide, range of cast of characters, from professionals to laypersons to Mr. Overton. Actually, Councilman Overton serves and has been at most of those meetings as well. So it's been great to have those conversations with, again, a lot of stakeholders in our community that bring different perspectives. We don't always agree on everything, but we try to get to consensus. And staff's guiding principle is what we believe is in the best interest of the community overall. And that's generally what we're going to propose to you today with some of those questions, right? We need your help in defining what that means a little bit today. So I think I'm going to jump into the first topic that's on the agenda. And this is secondary. Right now, they're called secondary dwelling units. Part of the proposal is to change the terminology to accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. That's more common terminology that most people understand. This won't solve our housing attainability issue, but it is a tool that isn't used maybe as frequently as it could be in our community. So that's sort of the idea with this, is what are we, with our standards in city code, doing to be in the way of allowing more of these? And again, I've got some of this feedback before. Some of you, council, are newer and have not been part of those past conversations and direction giving to staff. So this may be one that you hear in another 18 months or 2 years. And we, hey, our society is shifting. Are we still wanting to go this way? But we have some draft changes to that, to our ADUs, and some of them, quite frankly, the standards are misused and misunderstood. And that's what we're trying to do, is basically have all of the various codes. So International Residential Code, UDC, addressing, all come together. So it's clear what an ADU is, how you get one, what comes along with that. You get an address, you get services, you get a driveway, you get, and what is just an addition to an existing home. And you can't just throw a house number on that and say, well, this is my ADU. No, it comes with some certain conditions to qualify you then as an ADU. You can do both, but to qualify as an ADU, you have to meet these criteria. And if you're going to be an addition, that's a separate thing. So again, trying to marry those codes together the best we can and clarify the processes and, again, situations that need to be present to qualify as an accessory dwelling unit. There are a couple of things I want to call to your attention. So again, not going to read you the changes, but there are a couple of things even within the memo that I want to clarify. Excuse me. We are going to require them to hook up to sewer, water, electricity, and have garbage service. Kind of some of the mixed signals we've gotten. Again, this is that threshold to qualify. It is a lower bar to allow the accessory dwelling unit to just use the primary dwelling unit's services. So basically have a Y off of those services to also serve that. Some communities do require a separate meter, separate hookups, but that makes your costs go up in the feasibility of getting these more. So I think in a perfect world, putting my public works hat on, and MUBs even, you do have those separate connections for each one, independent connections. We're not proposing that. We don't think that adds a lot of value to that process, and again, lowers the bar. We're not lowering the bar on, no one can really see that, but to share a a sewer hookup. The city isn't being shortchanged either. They're still paying for the usage of the water that you use there and whatnot. But that is something that I'll pause, and if there's other thoughts on that, we could potentially require the separate standalone services. You have to have the service. If it needs to be independent or not, I guess is my first pause.
Okay, yeah, I think it's a good time for us to take a beat and get some feedback and questions. Councilman Taylor.
Yeah, Caleb, thank you. I think just a general sentiment from my perspective, I think ADUs are obviously growing in interest and in demand. I think it's part of our solving a little bit of the housing challenges that we have. My inclination would be that we make it easier, not more cumbersome, less red tape in the way of getting there. I mean, whatever we can do to streamline, simplify, make it quicker for us to get to bringing these types of housing units online, I think is better. But striking the right balance of, preserving the integrity of our water systems, things like that. But I think being overly cumbersome or having too many requirements is something I would like to see us kind of shy away from, but I understand there's a balance. So I think that's kind of my sentiment, is I'd like to see us move towards making this as simple and easy as possible while maintaining the appropriate balance of integrity there.
Madam Vice President.
Council President Cavanagh.
Caleb, I tend to agree with Councilmember Taylor, and maybe this is good follow-up for us at a later point in time, which is difference between an addition versus an ADU. My perspective is that most people that would be coming in for an ADU, right, that's on something that's already been constructed. So it's a homeowner, that's going through this process, as opposed to somebody who's very sophisticated in the development community. So I do think a very neighborly approach that makes this easier, not more challenging, while also balancing the public safety need is kind of the direction that I would want to go. I'd want to understand why we would need them to have their own trash hookup and those things. Like what are the gains from requiring that? I think that this needs to be a low barrier entry for our residents to be able to take advantage.
Maybe just some feedback from me as well, unless there are other questions really quick. Yeah, I read the memo and I thought you're on the right track. I guess the only thing I wanted to make sure was that if we're not requiring separate utilities, that we are somewhere, and it doesn't have to be here, but that we somewhere are at least making sure there's a minimum standard being met in terms of just public health and safety I have a just general view that all individuals with, this type of housing should at a minimum have like electricity and water and,
Yes.
and, wastewater services. So whether they're relying on, piggybacking off of somebody else's hookup, I think I'm very flexible on that, but I just want to make sure that we're kind of keeping standards where they should be.
Yes, good comment. And we will
Okay.
definitely verify that there's capacity in that service and that it's
Right.
up to standard. I want to, as we transition to the second part of this and then on to the next topic, Councilman Cavanagh mentioned home ownership. That is one of the current standards we are proposing to maintain, is that the property owner actually has to live in one or the other of the dwelling units on site. So this cannot be a solely rental. That is one of the levers we have, that barrier to entry. So some of the comments in other communities, they do not require that, but we didn't feel that's appropriate at the staff level or the UDC focus group, although there was some variation in that. Hey, if you really want more of these, don't require the property owner to live on site. You'll likely get more, because I can double my income, essentially, maybe not double, but I can add more income to my rental property if I can have a second rental on it. Right now, we say the property owner has to live in one or the other of the dwelling units. So just a point of, again, something that if we really wanted to see more, we could say they can both be rentals, but that's not where we're at today. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but neighborhood integrity is something that we are trying to protect here. That's some of the past direction we've gotten from council. So we still are requiring parking for that unit. Again, you could say, well, park on street. That's not where we're at. We are going to still have a parking requirement for the ADU. You could vary in setbacks and location. So in past discussions, some of council has said, hey, if you got something from your adjacent property owner and they approve a, encroachment into your rear or side setback, maybe that's something we can consider that isn't a standard setback. We aren't going there. And then you could, right now, we have a maximum size of 900 square feet and a minimum size in the building code. If I didn't write that down, it's at least a few hundred feet. Councilwoman Strader, I know you, Vice President Strader, excuse me, you have mentioned that before, some concern about these ultra small micro units. There is a minimum to qualify, but the maximum is 900 square feet. Again, we could play with that. If you really want to see more, we could just say, as long as you have sleeping, eating, and, living quarters. But we do have those standards. So that's why it's couched in the memo. Thank you for pulling that up, Bill, is other things we could play with, but we're not currently proposing that. So just wanted to call those to your attention.
Okay.
And then there's a little bit of a tag team
Just a
event.
second.
If there's anything else on that.
Excuse me, Caleb.
Council
Go
Vice
ahead.
President,
Mhm.
just the last comment on ADUs before we move on. My hat's off to staff sitting through all these meetings and the focus group, bringing all those people to the table for the conversation, because this is can be a very contentious issue. We want to try to allow that more affordable housing in those places where it's applicable. But at the same time, we need to find that balance in the community and really need to make sure that what we're doing and the intent of what we're doing makes the city better. We don't want to be doing something that starts to tear apart some of our neighborhoods in the city to make this happen. And that was the balance that was trying to be struck as we were going through this. And I thought they did a very good job as they laid this out on trying to find that balance, keeping some of those regulations. There are cities that don't have all those regulations. And I appreciate the fact that we're keeping those the way they are right now as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. All right, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, members of the council. Happy to be here, and thank you, Councilman Kapner, for at least suggesting that last year, come back, bring these in front of you so you guys can understand what we're trying to do this upcoming year here. So private streets is one that came on our radar pretty quickly. UDC focus group, what we're seeing, I think council's probably seeing this more and more, is, as you know, we continue to grow and land is becoming more and more scarce. So we will tend to see more and more infill going forward. And we had some developers come forward and say, hey, we've always had private streets in our UDC. We have those currently, but they're used in a limited fashion, and that's for a reason. We have ACHD. Most of the times, the concerns that we hear about private streets is maintenance or access for pedestrians and for bicyclists. And we do address that in the UDC, but this next round of code changes, we're trying to broaden the scope of when a private street may be appropriate. I can also share with you that I've been in many meetings the last couple of years where ACHD has also encouraged developers to go the private street route because they could not see a public benefit because of the scope of their project and how small it was. And I think you've heard some of the challenges we've been having with addressing recently. And so we're trying to bridge all of those topics together and make it universal and unified in one document in the UDC. I know Brian McClure in Long Range is also going to be coming forward and talking to you about some changes to Title VIII, which coincide with some of the private street changes that we're trying to marry up or talk today. I don't have all of the requirements memorized, but we are trying to make it clear that in residential setting, you do X, Y, and Z, meaning maybe sidewalks on both sides of the street, maybe a wider street, maybe have designated parking where you don't have a wider street, because we know people that live on private streets have events, have family events, have get-togethers. We want to make sure fire department has adequate access to get into those types of facilities, but people can also park and be safe and enjoy their community. The other piece of it is addressing where someone may go into a commercial development and want to do a residential project. I think there was one, if you guys recall, South Meridian off of Lake Hazel, where they had some residential units right up to a commercial and a mixed use designation. And we were talking with you about addressing those units because some of them did not front on a public street. So what is the appropriate mechanism? We shared with you that the fire code addresses that, but we also want to make sure that whatever we do marries up with other code sections that we enforce on a daily basis. And then the third part of it is Ada County on occasion has required commercial developers to name their commercial drive aisles through their parking lots. And we've gotten notification. We're like, wait, what happened? Why do you have a named street through your parking lot? And we realized the county has required that. And so that's the other piece of it. So it's really a three-prong approach. It's when is it appropriate for residential? How do we address it when we have large multifamily projects that don't need public street frontage, infill, and then also addressing as an ongoing process. But I think in all, we made some good progress. I'm not going to sit up here today and say that it's fully baked. Caleb has quite a few comments. I know the long range team has quite a few comments, and so does the UDC focus group. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around that and get some of those nuances worked out. But
Maybe I
there
could
are
just
quite
kind
a
of
few
interject.
changes.
I guess what
Yes.
I'm hearing is this is, and I think reading the memo, this is kind of a pulse check, if you will, on
Yes.
where you all are at with your process. And we don't really have a final form yet of recommendations. This is kind of a status report is what I'm seeing nods. So that's what I think what we're hearing. And, I think on any of these items, I think maybe just a takeaway also for the council would be just if you disagree with the direction that any of these items seem to be going, is we can also provide follow-up directly to Bill. I think like just as an example, I just philosophically, I'd like to see a minimization of the amount of private streets in the city because I am not convinced that the entities that are building the private streets will be able to pay to maintain them in the future. So that I have a little bit more of a just philosophical issue on that. I'm not saying it's never appropriate, but I think there needs to be a lot of thought around doing that on a widespread basis. That is the only item I was deeply kind of had a deep feeling about, but just looking around private streets, I think there may be others that have similar thoughts. So I guess I would encourage everybody to reach out to Bill on that one specifically.
Madam Vice President,
Yes.
if I can, just as we went into this as staff and then through the focus group too, I think one of the key philosophical things with private streets is we're opening the door a little bit wider to them, but we're not, we're not slamming it wide open so that everything and everywhere can be a private street. But it was pretty narrowly focused, so we're looking at maybe broadening that a little bit more. I will say one of the key takeaways, we're playing with that language still. For infill, I want to highlight that because I'll use a specific example that has been problematic to us at Eagle and Ustick, where private streets were the first streets to go in. And then you get people that are trying to connect through private streets. So we really are trying to limit them in those settings to where, okay, the rest of the network is generally figured out. And you're a piece here that doesn't negatively affect connectivity of the greater good. So that's where, again, we want to be clear that if you're greenfield development and the first to go into a section and it's not figured out, you're going to have a higher bar to clear to prove to us that private streets are appropriate.
It's funny because that exact example was the reason that I would not like any private streets in the city. So that's funny that you mentioned that. Maybe I think maybe what we're going to do is we have about 7 minutes before we're going to break. Let's go ahead and try to touch on the drive-throughs if that's okay, because I feel like that is a bigger, kind of newer item.
Yes, I appreciate that, Vice President
Yeah.
Strader. Because that is one that I feel pretty confident on where we're headed. Definitely, I appreciate the pause on it from last year and said, staff, go look at this and come back with something better. So I think Caleb laid it out well in the memo. We are taking a tiered approach and looking at these from a different impact on the community, going back to that word, because that's what it really is. And as we all know, not all drive-throughs function equally, but they are defined equally in our code. And so again, we've got a lot of feedback on this. We did look at nationwide standards. We looked at local standards. And I think what I have drawn up here is probably something I haven't seen. It's that tiered approach. And I did work with one of the industry experts that does this throughout the nation. And he really liked the suggestions and we're headed with it as well. So again, the goal was to limit the public hearing process. So I guess my request from council or some feedback from you tonight is, do you like the approach with limiting, again, the way the ordinance is written currently, if it's not within 300 feet of a residential use, residence or district, it's going to be staff level, regardless of the tier. And I know sometimes the council, you were here, you've heard Raising Cane's, you've heard other, you have an application before you this evening to talk about drive-throughs, and these are those tier 3 drive-throughs is how I've couched them in the code, but they do have the most impact. But again, if they meet the standards, I think what we have drawn up here won't solve all the issues, but at least it broadens it a little bit more so we can take a look at that and make sure that we have appropriate standards.
Okay, maybe we take a pause there. Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, Councilman Taylor.
Bill, you've done a lot of work on this. I really appreciate it. I had no idea I'd be dealing with so much with drive-throughs when I was thinking I'd be on city council, nor did I appreciate the amount of impact it has on it. I really like this approach. I like the thinking of how can we keep it in your hands as much as where it makes some sense. But one thing I've also learned is not all drive-throughs are not all the same. They're very different depending on where they're located and just sort of the structure around it. So when I was reading this, I'm like, oh, I really think that's creative. I like where you're going with that. So I look forward to kind of seeing how you kind of slot all that in there. But I really like the direction on this.
Council Vice President Schrader.
Yep. Council President Kevner.
Yeah, Bill, kudos. This is, I think, really great work. Of all the stuff, there's some pieces that are interesting, but I'm really excited for us to kind of weigh in on this. A couple just quick questions. Recognize we'll have a larger conversation later. I'm thinking of, we had a bank. So if, let's say that bank was built today, it would be a tier 1, that then converted into being a restaurant, which then I would think be a tier 2. Does that mean then that when a property owner or the business owner would come in, essentially apply for a tier 2 use? And will the standards be in as such that the way the building is built, they wouldn't be able to achieve that second level tier? I guess have you, and I don't need an answer on that necessarily right now, just the first thing that kind of popped up into my mind. And then to your question, I'll just kind of share, I think, where I'm coming from. I think a tier 1 for staff makes sense. I think I could probably get there on a tier 2, recognizing that if somebody disagrees with staff decision, they can appeal it. It's the tier 3, because I look at that as a much higher intense use. I almost think that one should probably come for us, but I'm not necessarily opposed to them all being with staff. Where I think of small use, bigger use, huge use, those are the ones that really are going to have the largest impact on our citizens. And I would imagine when you're getting to something like that, that is a tier 2 use, regardless of the decision that staff is going to make, someone's likely going to ask us to review that as well. And so rather than complicate the process, it may be in everybody's best interest just to have those go before us. So just my 2 cents.
Okay. Right. Sounds like you've got some good feedback that people love the tiered approach, but maybe following up on some details about how we go from one tier to another seems important, and also the approvals. I think we want to think that through. Okay.
Gotcha. And that is addressed in the current changes too, the tiered 1 to tier 2. So
Okay.
more to come. Thank you for the feedback.
Okay.
Then-
A couple minutes here.
Yeah, I won't
got-
spend a lot of time on flex space, but
Okay.
again, it's just basically another tiered approach based on zoning. So so again, if you're in a lesser commercial zone, you provide more office and less warehouse. And as you transition to a higher commercial zone or an industrial zone, you can lessen the amount of office and add more warehousing or industrial space storage.
If I can, just a finer point on that real quick. Flex space is a use. You also have industrial uses, light industrial uses, warehousing as principally permitted that don't require any office or commercial uses. So in your industrial zones, you can be 100% warehouse or 100% of these industrial. We're really talking about if you want to be a flex building in a commercial zone, you need to have some commercial aspect to that. So that's really the intent here is, again, we're not saying all industrial buildings need to have a retail component or a showroom or office space even. It's when you want to classify yourself as flex, and based on zoning, those are the proportionate shares. So I just want that to be clear. This is one where we aren't at consensus with the UDC focus group, so I'll just call that out. I've gotten some comments from some of our the largest industrial developer that we have in the community, and they want more, and I see their point on a lot of this, but that's kind of the counterbalance to that is, okay, well, you're in a commercial zone, and we aren't necessarily looking for large warehousing. This is small scale. It's in the definition, warehousing with ancillary, non-industrial type of users. So again, putting that in the context of what's on the ground and the location you're at. But I think this is and I'll just, some of those comments, we are on the right direction is some of the feedback, but it's still too strict to use some of their words, some of the feedback we've received as staff. So
I think the other important component is because of Caleb mentioning the commercial component of this use, that we're applying the commercial parking standards to it. Because in an industrial zone, it's, what is it, 75% less parking in an industrial district than a commercial district. So, and we know we've seen an uptick in commercial where we have commercial users going in industrial space through that conditional use process. So we want to be mindful that we're not giving up so much industrial to other commercial users. So staff really feels like that is one of the most important components as well, is making sure we get the right parking balance for these types of businesses and uses. And then any feedback on that before we quickly get to fencing?
Let's just check in does anyone have any feedback or just a strong reaction one way or another to that one? I think this is one of those, you're just going to keep churning through it. And I think especially talking with your industry experts at the same time to get their feedback to try to meet the right compromise that's still workable, right? We don't want to be too prescriptive but at the same time, I get exactly what you're saying about parking and some of these other aspects. So, okay. And we have a couple of, it looked like cleanup items, things we've talked about before, fencing. Should we touch on fencing?
One thing about fencing, it will be a repeal and replace. So you
Okay.
probably have never seen that, but there's so many changes to it that it's just easier to repeal the old and come in with a brand new one. A lot of it reuses the existing code, but just clarifies when you have a grade change, when you have decorative trellises in your backyard. I think it's going to allow the community a little flexibility to do more in their backyard and add some of those decorative elements, but at the same time, hopefully help code enforcement enforce the code a little bit easier and at least make it more enforceable for them. And so I am really happy that we're working with legal and code on this, because they're the ones that are out there trying to find a definition of a fence, and a blue tarp on a 20-foot pole is not a fence. But they have seen those things. So we were, again, back in front of you in September. We shared with you some of those photos and some of the interpretations they have to make in the field. And I believe this is one of those ways where we can enhance that, modernize the code, and hopefully get somewhere where everyone is happy with it.
Okay, great. Well, I think with that, you're planning to come back to us in August. When would you like to hear from the council members? If people have feedback, I would recommend giving people a minimum of 2 weeks. But when would you like to hear from council members if they have additional comments or concerns?
Vice President Strader, good question. And just to clarify, so in August, we plan on that being the public hearing. So it'll be vetted through the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I would like to meet with our UDC focus group on Thursday. Give him a couple of days to make those tweaks, and we can get something back out first part of Monday's a holiday, first to middle part of next week. And then within the 2 weeks, then please provide us any feedback, comments. But you ultimately this is more for you to start thinking about and chewing on, even if we propose something that's not ideal. But earlier is the better, but you will have another bite certainly later. So middle of next month.
Fantastic. I think we have a solid plan. And with that, we are at the end of our meeting.
Madam Vice President, move we adjourn the work session.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, fantastic. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we are adjourned.
Council will call this meeting to order. For the record, it is May 20, 2025 at 6:04 PM. We'll begin this evening's regular city council meeting with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Cavanagh. Councilwoman Little Roberts. Councilman Taylor. Councilman Overton. Councilman Whitlock. Councilwoman Strader.
Here.
Mayor Simison.
Here. Next up is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd all please rise and join us in the pledge. Next up is our community invocation, which tonight will be delivered by Rick DeMichelle from Treasure Valley Baptist Church. It's a pleasure to have you here and nice to see you again so soon after our last conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And I was thinking as I was sitting there this evening about an article in the Wall Street Journal about 15 years ago that decided that Meridian, Idaho was the best place in the country to live. And since then, everybody in California and about half the rest of the country has decided that's true. And so it's made life more interesting for all of us. And it's with a spirit of thankfulness that I invite members of the council, honorable mayor, and everyone else in the room to join me in a word of prayer to our Heavenly Father. Lord, we thank you for bringing us here tonight. We thank you for this beautiful spring day in this wonderful place to live, arguably the best place on this great blue planet to live. And so for that, we're thankful, we're blessed. We ask that you bless each council member here with a spirit of wisdom and understanding and all that they'll deal with tonight. And Father, may each issue and order of business be considered diligently, even when there's a sense of redundancy. Father, we pray, Lord, that you would help them to approach each situation in a spirit of righteousness with a sense of equity. And we do thank you, Lord, for government, Lord, that it gives us protection. It helps us with prosperity and blessing in society. And to this end, we pray in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, that name above all names. Amen.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay. Next up is adoption of the agenda. Councilman Cavanagh.
Move we adopt the agenda as presented.
Have a motion, a second to adopt the agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is agreed to. Next item up is a proclamation. Councilman Overton, I know that you were the original person that they reached out to. I don't know if you'd like to join down there or even do the proclamation yourself. It's got some big words in it, but oh, let's join me down there. And Tammy, if you and anybody else here would like to join us at the podium, that'd be great. So, Council, just one of those little personal privileges as we get ready to this proclamation. We don't often get to talk about our time in college, but as a member of the Phi Delta, still a member of the Phi Delta Theta fraternity, we're one of our proudest members was Lou Gehrig, the individual who will be referencing here as it relates to this proclamation this evening. So I know the Phi Delta Theta fraternity has always been big in supporting research for this very specific topic. So it's very timely and appropriate from my standpoint, because I know that this is about the time of year that a lot of this does occur. So, Mr. Overton, do you want to do the honors of reading the proclamation? Okay.
In the office of the mayor of Meridian, whereas ALS is commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease, is a progressive, fatal neurodegenerative disease in which a person's brain loses connection with their muscles, slowly reducing a person's ability to walk, talk, eat, and eventually breathe. Thousands of new ALS cases are reported every year, and estimates show that every 90 minutes, someone is diagnosed with ALS and someone passes away from ALS. And whereas the ALS Association is the largest philanthropic funder of the ALS research globally and is committed to accelerating the pace of discovery, fueled by the hope that one day ALS will be a livable disease for everyone, everywhere, until a cure can be found. And whereas clinical trials play a pivotal role in evaluating new treatments, enhancing quality of life, and fostering assistive technologies for those living with ALS, and whereas ALS Awareness Month provides an opportunity to increase public awareness of the dire circumstances of people living with ALS, acknowledge the terrible impact this disease has on those individuals and their families, and support research to eradicate this disease. Therefore, Mayor Robert Simison and myself hereby proclaim May 2025 as ALS Awareness Month in the City of Meridian and call upon all of our citizens to join in supporting ALS research, advocating for increased funding, and standing in solidarity with those affected by this relentless disease. Dated today, the 20th of May, 2025.
So thank you so much for making May ALS Awareness Month. As you had said, every 90 minutes, someone is impacted by ALS, and it's a devastating and terminal disease with no cure, but there is hope. So by making this proclamation, you are helping to raise critical awareness, and awareness leads to action, whether that's increased research funding or helping out families, or ultimately to find that cure for ALS. So thank you again for supporting the ALS community. It truly means so much. Thank you. Yeah. And I have Heidi Franz with the ALS Association. Could she come up and join the picture? Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, you want to sign up under public forum?
Mr. Mayor, nobody signed up.
Okay, then with that, we'll move on to our action items this evening. First item up is item 2, which is public hearing for CR 2025-0001. We will open this public hearing with staff comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The first application, and actually only application for you tonight, is a request for city council review of the director's decision on the application for Chick-fil-A. This site consists of 1.22 acres of land. It's zoned CG and is located at the northeast corner of North Eagle Road and East Village Drive. This property received certificate of zoning compliance approval for a drive-through establishment in 2012 with the site plan shown on the left. The UDC requires an escape lane to be provided in the drive-through if the stacking lane is greater than 100 feet in length. The approved site plan complies with this standard by utilizing 2 stacking lanes, which converge into one after ordering to allow a clear travel lane on the outside to escape or leave the site if necessary before reaching the service window. The applicant applied for a new certificate of zoning compliance earlier this year to change the configuration of the existing drive-through by replacing the escape lane with an additional queuing and stacking lane and adding a new escape lane after the service window. And that is, if you can see right here on the drawing on the right here in this location, right near the intersection here. The request was denied by the director because it doesn't comply with the intended purpose of the requirement, which is to provide a clear travel lane for vehicles to bypass the stacking lane and exit the drive-through before reaching the service window. A situation when this might be necessary is when a driver forgets their wallet or no longer has time to wait. An escape lane after the service window does not meet the intent of this requirement, thus the reason for the denial. The applicant has submitted a request for city council review of the director's decision in this matter. No written testimony has been submitted. Staff will stand for any questions.
Thank you. Council, any questions? Okay, would the applicant like to come forward?
Excuse me. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Elizabeth Kekritz with Givens Pursley, 601 Bannock, Boise, Idaho. With me today is Blake Berner, Carrie Teresa, Parker Bodley, who are all associated, not necessarily directly working for Chick-fil-A, but with Chick-fil-A, as well as our local owner operator, Brad Miles, who is a local resident and does actually live right here in Meridian, the owner of this particular Chick-fil-A. They're here today. They'll be able to answer any questions that I'm unable to do. As Sonia mentioned, we are located, I believe everyone probably knows where this is, right at the northeast corner of Eagle and Village Drive. It was first originally approved in 2012. It was the first Chick-fil-A in the Treasure Valley region. I remember this. It was a really big deal when it opened and my kids were super excited. Since then, it's been very popular. In 2019, they added on some canopies where the red arrows are directed. And then in February 2024, they submitted for a building permit to add additional canopies and do some pavement widening. There was a bit of back and forth after that when it was realized finally that they did need to receive a certificate of zoning compliance and apply for administrative design review. That happened this past year, and the director did deny the CZC and the design review applications. Here is a comparison, I'll show you a better one here in a minute, of the existing and of the proposed. And what they really are looking at doing is they want to change that second lane to an approved drive-through lane that they really are considered a multi-flex lane. As I'll discuss in a minute, it's not used all the time. It's just used during peak hours to help assist with stacking and queuing to get it off of the parking area and to get it away from the other businesses in the same vicinity. So the actual improvements that they are proposing is all Chick-fil-A's, they try to have this employee safety striping between their aisles and along the building. And that's really important because it really increases the safety for the team members. It increases the safety for the cars. They know better where they're supposed to be. And then it also increases efficiency because the team members can walk up and down those strips. Everyone knows where they are, and they can be taking orders from both sides of the center strip there. There's also a similar 2-foot wide center strip along the building. There is a slight pavement widening. And then with this, if people are going to be able to receive food now in 2 places instead of just along the building, they also want to extend that canopy over the second lane. And then there is that escape lane that's been added at the end. The benefits really are the enhanced safety for team members. There's the enhanced safety for patrons. And one of the really big things is this sort of second flex lane will increase the We increase the efficiency of the drive-through by at least 10% and often more. By having this second drive-through lane be an official drive-through lane, they can get an additional 9 cars in there, which is a significant increase in cars that you're keeping out of the rest of the parking lot at the village. And so then that does reduce the stacking. They did apply for the additional drive-through and canopy extension, and they were denied by the city, which said they require an escape lane to be provided for any stacking lane greater than 100 feet in length. Okay. The full extent of what city code provides about stacking lanes is written in red on the screen, which is any stacking lane greater than 100 feet in length shall provide for an escape lane. There is no other reference to or definition of escape lanes in city code. And this does, in fact, the location of this escape lane also does meet the technical requirements of city code. And while we can understand why staff would want it earlier, it does nonetheless continue to meet the requirements. The way this actually operates in reality, though, is this is not a constant 2 lanes running all the time. It really is only used during the busiest times of the day. There's about 2 hours at lunch, maybe an hour and a half in the evening when these lanes are open. The rest of the time, it continues to act as the bypass. The second lane continues to operate as the bypass escape lane through all the rest of the time, and they can be used in cases of emergency. One of the things that's different about Chick-fil-A from other restaurants, similar drive-through restaurants, is they do always have people out there. So in the event that when both lanes are running simultaneously, there will be at minimum 6 to 10 team members working those drive-through lanes and being in and out. And so there are people there if there was a true emergency or even someone who wanted to get out through the lane, there are people there who would be able to assist in that. This is not like some other fast food restaurants where you sit there and there's no one there and you just make your order into the little box. While they have those little boxes, those are very rarely used, usually only at breakfast when they're much, much slower than the rest of the day. Additionally, just to touch on in the owner's experience and then in Chick-fil-A's experience overall, there are very few people actually get into the line and then realize that they don't want the food. And to date, at least in this owner's experience, there's also very fortunately, there have not been any emergencies. There's the occasional stalled car that they have to push out of the way, but generally speaking, it operates very smoothly, and this sort of setup has been used in other jurisdictions and it operates really well. I think it's also important to talk about the site constraints of this. This is not a new building. If it were, we'd be able to set it back further from the roads and incorporate it. No one expected this particular business to be quite as successful as it was between 2012 and to date, it's gone from about $3 million in business to about 15. So it is really working hard. Obviously, an exit onto Eagle Road doesn't meet standards. An exit onto Village Road doesn't meet ACHD standards. Where there's the existing canopy, you can't, that restricts the ability to get out earlier. There are setbacks, of course, along all the edges. And this really is the least intrusive option with the biggest effect of really helping out the local businesses that are surrounding it, getting these cars from backing up into the other areas. They did look at, of course, other options that they could do. And the other options also just didn't really make sense. They could have installed an escape lane right as you very first begin to enter the site and then immediately pull out. That also doesn't really make sense in that far left-hand corner. Another option they looked at was extending the queue lanes across the entire northern portion of the site with the same striping. But they don't need that all the time, and it just doesn't make sense to add in a longer queue lane just so then you can later add an escape lane in a location that staff seems to think is a better location, even though the code doesn't require it and does not specify where this lane needs to be. So, here, and then here you can also see sort of those site constraints. Here you are along Eagle Road. On Village Road, you can see there's just simply not room there without going right into the setback, without encroaching into the setback. And from the top, you can really just see those large setbacks off of Eagle. There's just not a lot of places to really put this escape lane. And so with that, we are requesting approval of the escape lane and of the CZC and design review applications. It doesn't look in city code like there's really any standards associated with this, or I'd normally be talking about this is what you need to find. I think it's just that you need to find that this makes sense. This is the common sense result. This is really going to assist the neighboring businesses in getting cars through faster. It assists the patrons. It makes everything safer for the employees. And as I mentioned, they always have someone out there. And so if there is an emergency, someone is there who will be able to assist in getting the cars moved and getting the people out. And so with that, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Council, any questions for the applicant?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Taylor.
Elizabeth, thanks for your walking us through that. One question, you mentioned that the design you're proposing has been used in other locations. I have frequented this Chick-fil-A. I have 4 kids. It is a little awkward getting in when it's busy, and it's kind of awkward getting out, just when you're kind of making that turn and there's the trash receptacle. I got a truck, so it's hard to make that turn sometimes. My question is, if you're going to kind of make that escape lane there on the corner, in other locations, was that then the primary exit point for cars? Because I'm wondering, is everyone going to try to go through that new access? Or are they going to follow the current route to get out? Because it just seems like it's a very tight, and I understand the site constraints, but that's a tight little spot. So I'm just curious what you can speak to from previous sites that have the similar layout.
Well, as far as Mayor Simonson, Councilmember Taylor, as far as that specific answer, I can have someone from Chick-fil-A actually answer the question. They'd be able to do a better job than myself. However, we did talk about that and talk about having signage, having, even if it has a bollard, some sort of way that it can be used in the event of a real emergency when someone needs to get out. But that generally speaking, you don't want all the cars just dumping out right there.
Maybe if I could just piggyback on that. It's really a secondary exit, not a escape lane, and a secondary exit that you would put a bollard up at or try to limit people exiting through that you've got. Unless you had a crash in the other exit lane, why would you go that way when there's no traffic at that point in time? So would someone sit there and wait for the bollard? And I'm not asking you, I've asked the team to come up, but if you put a bollard up, is someone going to come out there and open the bollard versus someone go left down the exit that doesn't have any cars in front of them?
Mayor Simonson, I do believe that people, in the event of the emergency, people will be trying to get out there because the traffic gets backed up even going in and out of this entrance into it. And so I do think that if there was the emergency situation, they would. And this is more of my personal experience, people pull around and then they just sit there in that lane and they make sure they've got all their food before they pull out. And there's then also a backing issue right there of people like, did I get it all?
And I get that. I guess my question is, if you have a bollard there, you're going to wait longer for someone to come and lower a bollard? Are the team line members out there going to be able to lower it? I'm just trying to get it. Let's get the terminology about what this would really be. Is this a secondary exit out of the property, or an emergency exit that someone would have to come and let people out of in order to utilize. You can put up signage, you can do a lot of things, but all these things you point out are very true. People are backed up, or people are just going to turn right, or you're going to prohibit them to turn right with something up that you're going to have a team member come in and let them out.
The preferred option is not to include any sort of bollard, but to have the signage directing them past that, saying, not an exit. That it's only the exit in an emergency situation.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
I will be brief because I've already made up my mind, and I agree with the director. I do not believe this meets the intent of our policy at all. I think that the definition of escape lane is based on its functionality, and functionally what you're proposing is not an escape lane. For me, it's simple because it's a public safety issue. I do not believe that the addition of this exit at all works. I don't think it meets the intent of the code. So that's where I'm at. I'm not open to this. That's just me. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Elizabeth, what might be helpful for me is to kind of understand, walk me through either on one of your diagrams or on a Google map. Luke's in the drive-through, I order. My wife says, hey, I need you home right now. I'm not going to take my food. What is my lane of travel from once I've ordered till I actually make the escape? That would help me because I am struggling to see kind of how this does function like an escape lane. But I really trust your subject matter expertise that you can walk me through how you see it and give me a sense of what our citizens or the patrons would experience.
Okay. Mayor Simmons and Councilmember Cavanagh, is you drive in, I don't really have a pointer.
I think yep, good. If even where that little,
Oh, I do.
Yep.
I can make this.
it runs a little slow because it's synced up with our broadcast system. So just give it, there we go.
So you drive in.
Yep.
I'm assuming at this point that this is a peak hour
Sure.
and that both lanes are operating. You come through, you order your food, you decide your wife says you need to be home right now. You just can continue on through and out if you don't want the food, if you don't want to wait to pick it up. You let one of these 6 to 10 team members know that you need to get out of there, and they help move cars so you can get out. And then you can either leave here, but ideally you would still, because it's not a true emergency, it might be, don't know, you would still come out here and exit.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
But I'm reliant then on all the other vehicles that are in front of me that have already ordered to either one, get their order first, or two, to be convinced by the incredible team members at Chick-fil-A to move them out of their lane and they would get food somehow, some way different. Is that really what we're reliant on?
Well, the lanes, Mayor Cavanagh, in part, I mean, the lanes are wide enough with these additional striping that you can start pushing the lanes, the people together, the vehicles together, so that you could get someone out of there. But in that event, once you ordered your food, you would be most likely to pick up the food.
Okay, that, Mr. Mayor, one more than this maybe help me. Where did the two lanes converge that would give me the opportunity to leave?
Where do the two lanes converge?
Yeah, you mentioned that there's enough space that the lanes would come together
Oh.
and so that I would be able to leave. So where does that exist at?
Where is the striping is just striping on the pavement. And so cars can, the same way if there's an emergency vehicle, how you can scooch over to the side and there's room to make it through, you can start moving over to the side.
So, Mr. Mayor, then in summary,
Cavanagh.
I am really reliant on all the other people that are in front of me to move out of the way to accommodate my needs. So being frank, I don't see this as an escape lane. And I do worry to the mayor's point, and I did a quick Google measurement. It's 42 feet from your emergency exit to the entrance off of Eagle Road. And you're very correct. That spot is very, very busy. And I'd like to think that I'm a good Chick-fil-A customer. I could also see myself wanting to take that ride out. And what I worry is that I wouldn't be the only one, and the other patrons would do that. And so now you have effectively built a bottleneck because you've you've shrunk actually the real exit, and you almost make your problem even worse. So I love Chick-fil-A. My wife either is or will soon be ordering a bunch of catering for our oldest graduation party. Like, this location is successful, provide a ton of jobs and opportunities. I gotta say though, I think the director is probably correct on this, unless there's something that I'm missing.
Yeah, I think the.
If you can state your name and address.
My name is Brad Miles. I'm the local franchisee. I think the biggest thing that we're trying to accomplish by this is just to be able to expand, to be able to, and to her point, and to the question that you asked about, how would I get out? Right? How would you get out? The ability for us to be out there with 6 to 10 people on a, like right now, we're 6:35 at night. I probably have 9 people out there. And the fact that I have people out and we can ask people in that inside lane to move up, to move over in case of an emergency. We've never had an emergency outside of a stalled car to date, which is great. But we would always have the ability, because of that, to be able to alter cars, move them up, move them out of the way, to be able to get cars out. Now, the questions become before is like, what happens when people have no money, right? And they just need to get out. A lot of times we just give them their food for free, right? Yeah, I mean, and so, you know, this isn't a play on trying to make life more difficult. I think we're just trying to make life a little bit easier and simpler. That escape lane, that new addition one, it wouldn't be a bollard like that we would want to put there. I think we would want to use more like a magnetic delineator, that if cars in a true emergency just want to run it over, it's fine. You see those delineators that I have out there at the mouth of my drive-through as you come in to funnel to create 2 lanes? That's the same exact thing. Like, those things can easily get run over. They get run over all the time. And they're magnetic. So we can put them in and take them out quick, easy. If you need to run over them, that's fine. It's not going to do damage to that vehicle at all. So that's the whole point. I think we still want to be able to use the existing exit as is, and this right here is more for emergency type situation.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
And Brad, I track with everything that you're saying and what you're trying to intend to do, but it's not an escape lane though. It's really not. And I think that's the hard part, is that our directors, they follow our development code, and the development code requires an escape lane. And you're proposing, I think, again, being very innovative, like a multifaceted, almost like a Swiss Army knife of lanes, but it doesn't function like an escape lane. And I think that's the part that I'm having a hard time overcoming, even though I really, really want to overcome that concern. We trust our city staff to be subject matter experts, and they have to follow the code. They're the science and we're the art. And so I'm trying to kind of understand the real world impact. And I'm just not seeing how we overcome what is, I think, the concern of our director.
I think the success of Chick-fil-A, right? Kind of the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
We're just kind of this outlier. And so I think for us, like, we have to do unique to be able to, handle the volume that we handle on a daily basis. And so I think part of this, like, you're right, trying to get creative. We're 100%. We always try to get creative because we're not conventional. We're unique. We're different. The volume, everything about us, it's not conventional. And so we always have to do these type of scenarios of like, well, how can we make this work? How can we make it work? Because we are unique. And so I think this is part of this scenario of like saying, hey, like, this is a unique scenario that we have here. And so what can we do to alleviate, still meet code, but at the same time, try to be able to provide safety for the team members, safety for customers that are in line. So all those things are always top of mind, but we have to come up with unique strategies to do that.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Right, I hear you. And I think, what you're kind of then asking the council to do is to say, well, we're going to be consistent for everybody but Chick-fil-A. And That's hard, right? Because we've got to be consistent with all business. We don't look at Chick-fil-A different than any other place that comes before us. And I think that's the hard part, because I want to recognize and reward your ingenuity and the great opportunity you provide for so many people. So many of my son's friends work at your location, and just, it's been a game changer for them. And so I appreciate that, but we have to look at things kind of black and white and what the law says we can and can't do. And I wish I could find a nexus to say, well, that makes sense for Chick-fil-A. I'm sad about it, but I just don't think that I'm going to be able to find that nexus.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Taylor.
question that maybe staff can help answer, and maybe those who just have dealt with this issue in terms of defining in our code. Are these escape lanes, are these considered something as a public safety, or is this convenience? How do we actually view these escape lanes? Because that seems like an important question.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I think it could be both. It just depends on the situation that you need to escape the lane, escape the site.
Is it true what Elizabeth said in terms of the extent of what our UDC says about the requirements? It seems very vague. And according to the strict reading that was presented, it seemed like they could argue that they're in compliance. We have a different interpretation. Is there anywhere else in our code that speaks to some of those requirements?
No, I believe that she's quoted it correctly. We do have it seemed the intent was pretty clear, but since it apparently is not, or has room for interpretation, we do have that on our list for code amendments.
If I may.
Councilman Taylor.
It seems like an important question that if we're not explicitly clear in what the intent of these lanes is, then it's open to interpretation by the applicant, the director, or council as to the purpose of these lanes, whether it's for a true public safety, or is it for convenience to get cars out of the way because, they don't want the food, they don't want to wait, they forgot their wallet, whatever it is, a stalled car, whatever it is. Because when I hear some consideration of public safety need, I'm thinking a heart attack, or I'm thinking something where police and fire need access. And I've been through a lot of drive-throughs where we don't have those access lanes. They're not there. I can think of several just down the road that I've visited this week. Not to go into too much of my food habits, but I frequent drive-throughs, so I am very well aware of what they look like. So the application of well, I'm going to disagree with both my previous council members on what they've said. I think it's an unfair application of the standard that we have to, because there's several drive-throughs that don't have an escape lane. So that's kind of what my question is this for public safety? Is it required, or is it for convenience? Because I do think, I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to come down on this tonight, but it seems like an unfair application of our own words and our own rules if we don't apply that to all drive-throughs. And so I understand, when different circumstances and time. Is this 1995? Is this 2005? Is this 2015? I get it. It's all different. So I understand that's part of it, but it seems like an unfair application of the rules to say it doesn't meet the standard of an escape lane when we're struggling to define what an escape lane is or why we have it. And so I'm just kind of struggling to understand the intention of why we need these lanes versus how businesses and owners and operators are intended to understand that as they interact with this. So I'm still just kind of thinking that through a little bit. It's not really a question, Sonia, for you to answer now. I'm just kind of putting that out there to consider.
Well, and Councilman Taylor, you're kind of where my head was. I mean, as a general philosophy, I agree with the director's determination. And even as little as this explains, we all understand the intent. And I don't feel like what was proposed got to the intent, but I do have a question about whether or not it's even necessary. And I look kind of the same thing. You can look down the street, you look at, frankly, you want to wait in a long line. Well, there's some burger places right down here on Main Street where you will go in their very short line and you will be there for 45 minutes. Now, they happen to have an area where you can drive out and get around, but it's not required under code to do that. So to your point, the why, I think is an important component to this. And I've generally, because I've not been made aware of a public safety necessity on this one, it would question whether or not it's even necessary in our code to provide for an escape lane. If a business thinks that that's an important component to allow I think that is a consideration, but the Burger King right down here doesn't have an escape lane. I don't know, it's not 100 feet. The Burger King is 200 feet. Didn't seem like that long, to be honest with you, but the reality is I don't know the value and benefit of this being in our code at all. That's my opinion, but I do think the director's determination was appropriate based upon the code that currently exists. So take that for whatever it means or doesn't mean. And I just had a conversation on the code right before in the last workshop, but this again seems one that could at least be evaluated as to what it means or should it exist and why. Is it how long it takes you to get through the drive-through, or is it how long the drive-through is for some purpose that may or may not be defined?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Overton.
to Brad and Elizabeth, and I want to make a statement first, and there's a question in there somewhere. The hardest thing I have a problem with on this is my roots in law enforcement. We always look at what the intent was. And I'm struggling with the intent of why this became part of code. And my understanding is it's been part of our code since about 2005. It's just the way it's always been. It's standard practice, even outside of the city of Meridian, to request this. But not my kids, although it was my son's first job, Brad. My grandkids are why I've been in and out of your drive-through so many times, with 6 to 8 employees helping me. But the part that I struggle with is not the director's determination, because he's doing exactly what we ask him to do. He is that subject matter expert looking at code. He's doing exactly what he's paid to do. It's that I start that line usually close to Chipotle. So if I'm really, really worried about I need to get out of that line, is that really going to make that big of a difference if I've got to sit all the way through Chipotle until I make the turn and get into that camp and come all the way around before I've got an escape lane? How big of a difference does that really make? Secondarily, and I've got fire and police in the room and they can help me out, but we would never in law enforcement or fire request that somebody that needed assistance find the escape lane and get out of the drive-through if they needed help. We would go to them. It's not a public safety issue, having an escape lane. Unless somebody can tell me how otherwise it would be. It's not for use by your restaurant. It's not for use by our city. The escape lane is only for the convenience of customers. And this is where I struggle with, if you ran both lanes, and I'll make a suggestion. If you made the right lane an express lane only for those people that used your app, now you've got a faster lane to get people through. And those people that I get stuck behind that don't know what they want until they pull up, they take the left lane. Then you could actually build an express lane right through your Chick-fil-A and have a lane that you can move somebody into to get out quicker. Now, I'm not a fan of the second driveway, just because I think it could cause confusion. I've been going through it since you opened up both lanes and did the whole thing with the one lone driveway out. Sometimes it gets backed up, but I've always gotten out without a problem. Little patience means we eat some of the food in the car before we get home. Have you considered any other alternatives to what you've proposed tonight, where it would not have to have a secondary driveway that I do believe would cause confusion?
Mayor Simonson, Councilmember Overton, yes. One location, and the real problem, the real issue with this is that it is just such a constrained site. One location is coming out right where my arrow is right there. That seems silly because if you're getting out there, you already know, like, why didn't you just get out 10 feet earlier? The other thing, one thing that was discussed was having the queue lane backed up all along here, where they actually extended the actual queuing lane. And then, so that once you went into this, then you were in this, and then you could have an escape lane like right in here. But then that also doesn't make sense just to build an entire additional lane that's generally not needed, just so that we can continue to meet maybe a better escape lane when it's still pre-order, it's still, and it's just not needed most of the time. So that doesn't necessarily make sense either, the other locations. And there just simply isn't space in through here to have a real escape lane. And then obviously we're not going out onto Eagle Road or Village Drive. So this really is the location. Oh, and we've got our designers.
Parker Bodley, Barkhausen Engineering. My address is Nampa. But I've been working on this project. We've looked at different options. Really, the intent of the option that we provided is similar to a neighboring restaurant that I'm sure you're all familiar with. But it really was intended to meet the code by providing an escape lane. There's we'll pull up some examples in the area. So you can see on the right, and it provides an option similar to that. There's an escape lane. There's two lanes that merge into one point, and then there's an escape lane right there. And that's why we went with the option that we did, one that's been approved by the city before. And so at the point you've brought up what happens if a car needs to get out. And I think by providing those two options, we can move cars further down while the vehicle that needs to get out can go through that second option. And those vehicles can wait after that point to get their orders. And that's really the why we went with this option. Elizabeth went over all the other ones, but.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Schrader.
how many cars can fit in each lane?
I got to go back and look at that option, but I can give you that number.
It looks to me like 10 or more can fit in each lane. So just like hypothetically, let's say that we had a car that is stalled. So it's not a huge emergency, right? It's not someone having a heart attack, but we've got somebody who's got a dead battery, or we've got another problem. And that individual is 10 cars back, but they're blocked in halfway through. So what you're saying is your team of 6 to 8 team members is going to have to move the 5 cars ahead of them somewhere, I assume the parking lot, coordinate that, figure out getting everybody their order later. Like this, it just, I'm sorry, but it just strains credulity to me. And it's pretty obvious from what an escape lane is supposed to be that functionally it should mean that you can escape. Like to me, that is just like the common sense definition, plain reading of our code is that an escape lane should mean you can functionally escape. If you have to wait until you get all the way to the end of the lane, past where you get your food, that to me was attempting to meet the letter of our code, but certainly not meeting the intent of our code. And I just have to share that it really, to me, strains credulity to even hear the argument. I think there are a range of circumstances that could occur all the way from medical issues to car issues to potentially, a mass casualty event, a natural disaster, who knows? But we obviously draw certain lines in the sand where we have determined historically, if you have over 100 feet, this is what we require. And I feel like there's good reason for that. I don't feel personally like making an exception here is wise from the perspective of a precedent, from the perspective of, again, public safety. Also, convenience is extremely important to me. I don't ever want to be in a situation where I'm stuck. I've had it happen. It's the worst. I mean, and especially if you're trying to pick somebody up from school, you have something going on. Again, it just strains logic that this little tiny exit that you've added is somehow an escape lane. It's just functionally not. So Anyway, that's the extent of my comments. I think you know where I'm at, but I'm not going to be able to support this.
I'll respond. The average time that a car sits at our window is about 15 seconds. And so not only would we be able to move out within 2 minutes, we'd be able to move out, I don't know, 10 cars, but we'd also be able to move cars over to the left-hand lane to get people out. Like I said, I think if you look at this diagram and the existing restaurant that opened December of 2023 right by me, this is a direct, almost copy of that. So that question that you posed me, you could pose that to them as well. So that was approved. And so this is almost just like a carbon copy version of what was already kind of approved. And I can tell you, it's a lot longer than 15 seconds at that window.
Except for the big difference is where you get your food between those two restaurants. Yes, it looks the same on paper or an overhead, but not the same in operational component, because you still have to go past that escape lane before you get your food. So you're making a conscious decision at that point in time. Do I want my food? Do I not want my food at that location? But just so we understand, functionally, they're different in that context. It's not the same.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's very helpful that you provided that, because without having that in front of me, it would be hard for me to know that. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Going back to the one other component, and it's just, again, why I think it's worthy of a larger conversation that maybe it's not built around this application, but at least in the quick Google and AI feedback, escape lanes are typically used prior to people ordering their food. Because if they can't order within 6 minutes, that's according to industry studies. I'm not saying it's Chick-fil-A studies, but industry studies, if you wait in line more than 6 minutes, you're likely that's when you're most likely to leave. In this case, you actually force people to order way before that because it's pretty much when they get in, and if it's backed up into the parking lot and they don't want to wait that line, then you're right. They're not even go further. They're going to escape before they get to that point in time. But just some various differences in how your approach actually does, generally people are going to get, oh, I'm going to be here. Can't respond to, I don't think the policy built around one thing that maybe Luke's wife needing a stop off at Five Guys instead, is the right policy thing. But I do think that in my opinion, there is a larger question about the value and purpose of it, but to this application, remain to be seen. I want to give the other two, I think.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Little Roberts.
Mr. Mayor, Elizabeth, Brad, thank you so much for being here. I've been debating about how I feel about this, and I've got an incident that really colors it for me because I was apparently that 1 in a million customer that was about 10 cars back and got a call. My son, who's got life-threatening allergies, was going into anaphylactic shock. Thank heavens I was at a drive-through that truly had an escape lane, because I would not have felt that I would have felt like I was giving up precious time if I would have even had to get somebody's attention to get me out of there. And I was just able to leave. And to me, this just doesn't provide that access. And I know that's not the standard, but that's what happened to me that I had to live through. I mean, I would have gone over shrubs if I'd needed to get out of there.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind.
Yes, ma'am.
I apologize. I have an emergency at home and I need to leave.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Taylor.
A question about another alternative that hasn't been mentioned here and I think I kind of know the answer, is probably just not allowed on a collector, but it would look like, could you not make a similar sort of exit onto East Village right there on the corner? Would that make sense for a controlled escape lane there? Because I'm just curious, and maybe Sonia, or I don't know if you guys considered it, but could someone speak to, is that not a viable option as an escape lane? Here.
Mayor Simison, Councilmember Taylor, I can answer that. I don't remember the exact distance, but we did not meet ACHD separation requirements.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Whitlock.
Elizabeth and Brad, just so I'm clear in my mind, you're proposing to have 2 lanes going all the way to the window, so there would be an opportunity to walk across a lane of traffic to deliver food to a second lane, similar to what's at 10 Mile.
Mayor Simmons and Councilmember Whitlock, that is correct.
And then the escape lane would come after food is received.
It allows 9 more cars to queue through there in that after you've ordered through to where you pick up the food. So it really does increase the efficiency and get people through much faster during those periods when it is being used. As I mentioned, it's not going to be used much of the time.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Whitlock.
So if you're following the 10 Mile Chick-fil-A model, they do put up cones and direct it into a single lane during those non-peak hours so that you're not, I guess presumably you could have an escape lane if you had an emergency by blocking that second lane off during the non-peak hours. It's the peak hours where you're stacked 10, 12, 15 cars deep in 2 lanes where I think the consternation is right now. What do we do in those emergencies or situations where people need to escape?
I think a lot of it was when COVID happened. We had to shut down the dining room and then force all of our business through the drive-through. And then we started becoming a nuisance to our neighbors. It was like, I'd never ran 2 lanes before then. It was just like, man, I've got to do something because I have Village is putting a lot of pressure on me. I didn't lose staffing. I just relocated all my employees out to drive-through to accommodate. And that was all about trying to not be a nuisance on my neighbors, having cars back up into them, making it difficult to get in Chipotle, making it difficult at time to get into 547, all those businesses that are right there kind of across the way from it. And so this has always been about wanting to take cars from spilling out into the center and then move them into our own.
Council, additional questions or comments? Okay. Well, let's see if anyone signed up to provide testimony on this item then.
Mr. Mayor, nobody signed up.
No one signed up. Okay, well, is there anybody present, either in the room or online, that would like to provide testimony on this item? Okay, seeing none, would the applicant be getting final comments for closing?
I guess I would just like to say a couple of things. As mentioned, this is a it is an escape lane. It does meet code. A variance was not applied for. It was not looked at doing anything else because there's really nothing that we'd be asking to vary from because it does meet the technical language of the code. And for that reason, and the bigger reasons are, it just makes a lot of sense to have, like, you have the technical legal argument that I can make, but then all of the common sense reasons on people don't typically actually come through and then change their mind once they've ordered and decide that they really have to get out. There is the very rare occasion that Councilmember Little Roberts has experienced, but generally speaking, this is something that's good for the community. It's good for the patrons. It's good for the city. It helps continuing to increase the tax base here. It is a small business owner who's trying to do right by his neighbors, to not be an impediment on the neighboring properties, to do right by his customers who want to be able to come through there, and then also to do right by his employees, many of whom are just our local high school kids. And so I do think that there is plenty of reasons to overturn the director's decision, and we would ask that you do that.
Thank you. Council?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Overton.
just a last clarifying question. Out of your operating hours, how much of the time do you run just a single lane at the drive-up window where the escape lane that's already there is being used as an escape lane or available?
So we open it We're Monday through Saturday, 6:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. And so we are operating under a single lane from 6:30 a.m. till around 11:30. And then 11:30 till about 1:30 is going to be dual. It's 2 hours. And then again from 5:30 to 7:30. And that's nighttime. We have more lunch business than nighttime. And so it's typically more like an hour and a half, 90 minutes at night. So out of that, it's used as a pure.
Mr. Mayor, one follow-up.
That's what I'm
And Brad I'm going to walk you through what I've done before and what I've witnessed when you're using one lane versus when you're using two. Because it moves pretty fast. And I think you estimated that even if somebody needed to get out, when you were using dual lanes, with the number of employees you have, you could move everybody over to the left lane and probably clear that for the car that needed to leave in 2 minutes or less. That be a correct statement?
There was according to where they're at, but I'm pretty confident within 2 minutes we could have that car.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Whitlock, just
one clarifying question, Elizabeth. In your testimony, you said this does meet the requirements of city code, which if I read the language, it said any lane longer or greater than 100 feet requires an escape lane. So you've got 2 lanes that are greater than 100 feet. Is that correct?
There are 2, yes. Well, right now, there's 1 lane plus the escape lane. But we would be proposing 2 lanes that are both greater than.
So color in the edges for me then. If the 2 lanes are greater and city code says any lane greater than 100 feet requires an escape lane, and you don't have that escape lane until after the 100 feet, how are we meeting city code?
The code does not, Mayor Simonson, Councilmember Whitlock, it does not require, where's the thing? It does not have any information at all whatsoever about where the escape part has to be.
Be across town.
It's within this drive-through.
I think maybe where Councilman Whitlock was going, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're under a code, this may require you to have 2 escape lanes. If we're gonna legal each other, I think he might have you on the legal definition.
Don't put words.
I am gonna put word, any stacking lane, and you have 2, greater than 100 feet shall provide for an escape lane. To me, that's gonna be pretty clear legally defined. That would require 2 escape lanes under the code.
Mayor Simonson, I would argue it does not say that each one needs its own escape lane. Nowhere in there does it say 2 escape, that each shall have.
Right, correct. And each one of those needs one, and you're only providing 1 for 1 lane, unless you're going to consider the exit and escape lane for the other lane. And then you don't have an exit lane. We're not going to lawyer this, but I think I got to give it to him. He's on, you don't have your JD yet, right? You're still working on it? But if we're going to be legal about it and argue legal merits, I think that's a pretty good legal argument. Not that we were making it, but I think this should go back to a larger conversation about this issue generally, but.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Yeah, I think a larger conversation, though we're doing some UDC changes. I'm very open to a larger conversation down the way about code related to emergency lanes and stacking lanes, and sounds like staff is working to provide some greater clarity. I personally, I think from a legal and a common sense standpoint, it's not an escape lane. So I'm happy to move that we uphold the planning director. We got to close the public hearing. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I move that we close the public hearing.
I have a motion, a second to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? If not, in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The public hearing is closed. Councilman Cavanagh.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know where this will go, but for all the reasons I've shared, I'm going to move that we uphold the director's decision of denial on the certificate of zoning compliance and design review for application A 2024-0082.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to uphold the director's decision of denial. Is there discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Taylor.
I'm not going to support the motion because as I review this, I think the words are really important, and we as a city have not done a very good job making it clear what we expect here. I'm kind of stuck on the idea of what's the purpose of these escape lanes? And then I was looking for, do we define what an escape lane is? Is it for convenience? Is it for public safety? What's it for? All good points about a broader discussion. Again, here we are with drive-throughs, talking about them. Let's add this to the list of, do we as a city, are we going to require an escape lane? And if so, we need to be clear what it is, where it should be. I think if we, and I understand the decision by the director here, because when we talk about an escape lane, I think we all feel like we know what that is, but we don't actually know what it is. We haven't defined it. In my mind, we haven't done a good job defining it. So it's a subjective interpretation. When I consider how we apply it as a city, it should be fair and consistent. It is not fair and consistent to reject this or to uphold the director's decision, because I don't see it being applied fairly across the city. I can't in good conscience say, you get this, but you don't. And I think that's our fault. Not that we meant to, but just for lack of getting to the point of providing the clarity that I think is there. So that's, for me, if we're going to require this, we need to be consistent, and I don't see us being consistent. So I think because of that, we're open to being able to say, we as a body get to use our own interpretation of what's the intent here. I've been in the lane that's gone back to Chipotle too. I see this as saying we can move 9 cars through in a lane, like that actually makes a big difference. It is a challenging location, getting in, getting out, whether you're a patron that's walking into the restaurant or if you're a patron who's in the drive-through, it is just challenging. I also agree that the escape lane as proposed really is a secondary exit. It's not an escape lane in how we're liking to think of it, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But to me, it comes down to, if we're going to require it, we need to be consistent. And by upholding the director's decision, I don't think we're being consistent, so I won't be supporting that.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Overton.
I agree with a lot of the points of Councilman Taylor. I always want to agree with our directors because they are the subject matter experts, but what really bothers me is Chick-fil-A has been operating in this manner with both lanes for quite some time. And we're not here because there's a problem. Let me say that again. We are not here because there was a problem with how they were operating. We're here because they changed their operations and never got it approved. And when they went to go get the certificate of zoning compliance, this rule was found, and this is what frustrates me the most. They created a drive-through with double lanes that was much quicker, much more efficient, dealing with a greater number of cars in a shorter amount of time to alleviate the backup into the parking lots of other restaurants. And we're doing so, and still are doing so, very efficiently. But we're now caught up on a code in which we want to deny it based on something that's been there since 2005, and we're trying to fit it into this application in this location. And I'm struggling with how do I stand by that and say that was the right decision when I've watched them successfully do this for at least a year, if not 2 years, very efficiently and very quickly.
As I think I maybe have stated or haven't stated, I mean, I think there's a little bit more going on here. There isn't a desire to extend a canopy, to do some additional work. So there are some points in times where some of this is being further evaluated in that context. But, on a very personal, I have no issue with there not being an escape lane. I have no issue with there just being 2 drive-through lanes as a general rule through this or probably frankly, many other properties. And sometimes it is about the entity. Sometimes it's not, but as the way the Chick-fil-A operates compared to the way, if we were at, one of the finest burger restaurants in Meridian, right down the road here on Main Street at Main Street Burger, and they had 2 lanes that you could not escape, you might be there for an hour. I mean, that's the way they operate, different model, different thing. So sometimes looking at the code doesn't look at type of, who the business is. They just look at the, function of how we treat all businesses. But to my point, I'm okay if there's not one, but I'm not okay with not upholding the director's determination because I think it's clearly articulated. Common sense, I mean, again, if we're going to use common sense on both sides, you got to use common sense to what an escape lane is. And common sense dictates that, what's proposed is not that. And, so I won't be voting unless someone abstains from themselves this evening, but that's just my personal viewpoint on this issue. But, leave it for wherever it goes. And I think irregardless, we know we're going to have a follow-up conversation about what and how and if. And whatever decision is made, I think that there's an opportunity in the future for what and how and if, in my mind. Further discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I guess
Councilman
that's
Willock.
where my head is too. This is probably a decision that ultimately will be back before somebody at City Hall, either with a code change or tonight it might get approved. But to me, the wording of the code is pretty straightforward. The definition and purpose of an escape lane can be debated. That's not defined in code. I have a hard time reconciling in my own mind that this does meet the requirements of city code. I'm not there. Now, city code can be changed. This could meet city code in the not too distant future.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
I know that there's a motion on the table, but a question, if I may, for staff. Sonia, recognizing some of the feedback that you've heard from council and sounding like that staff have already initiated some clarifying language around this. Would it make sense, and again, I don't know how we may want to reopen the public hearing. The council were to continue this to a date certain after the council have had a chance to weigh in on some UDC changes around escape lanes. Would this applicant be subject to the previous code, or would they be subject to the code changes if we were to make them?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cavanagh, they'd be subject to the code in effect at the time of their application submittal.
Thank you.
There further discussion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh.
Aye.
Little Roberts.
Aye.
Taylor.
No.
Overton. Whitlock.
Aye.
4 ayes, 1 nay, and the motion to uphold the director's determination is agreed to. Thank you. I don't think the conversation is over. I look forward to future conversations. I'm sure Sonia and the team will be in touch with you as we move that conversation forward. Okay. With that, we'll move on to item 3, which is ordinance number 25-2084. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an ordinance annexing a parcel of land located in a portion of the northwest quarter of the southwest quarter of Section 15, Township 3 North, Range 1 West, Boise Meridian, Ada County, Idaho, more particularly described in Exhibit A, rezoning 33.893 acres of such real property from RUT to ME zoning district, directing city staff to alter all applicable use and area maps, as well as the official zoning maps and all official maps depicting the boundaries and the zoning districts of the city of Meridian in accordance with this ordinance, providing the copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Treasurer, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, repealing conflicting of ordinances and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this ordinance read by title. Is there anybody who would like it read in its entirety? If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Taylor.
Move that we approve ordinance number 25-2084.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve ordinance number 25-2084. Clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh.
Aye.
Little Roberts. Taylor.
Aye.
Overton.
Aye.
Whitlock.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carries. Sam is greet you. Council, anything on our future meeting topics, or do I have a motion to adjourn?
Mayor,
Councilman Cavan.
we adjourn the meeting.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.